Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello, this is Nick.
Hello, Nick Hlady. This is Paul Holdengräber calling you from the Quarantine Tapes. I'm so pleased that you could take my call this evening. Thank you so very much.
Hey, you're very welcome, Paul. Thanks for reaching out. I'm really excited to speak with you this evening.
Likewise. Tell me where I find you at this moment and how you've been living your quarantine.
Sure. So at this moment, I am by myself in small office in a residential building in downtown Los Angeles. I've been working from an office today on my own, and otherwise have been living my quarantine life like I imagine many others have as well, staying mostly at home while enjoying getting out in LA's streets, trails, at least a little bit more recently, and enjoying the benefits of Southern California's plentiful sunshine when I can.
When you say you're in an office downtown, what kind of work do you have there? If you could tell our listeners what kind of work you do.
Sure. So I'm an urban planner. I work for a small consulting firm, small planning consulting firm, a permit expediter, if you will. This firm focuses on a lot of hospitality based projects, so hotels, bars, restaurants, also housing, and a lot of adaptive reuse projects, meaning those that reuse historic buildings to serve a new purpose, like a lot of downtown LA buildings are. So I'm a urban planner by day, and then I also am a electronic music producer and DJ.
So by night you wear another hat, as it were, and then you're part of a group called LANA, which is the Los Angeles Nightlife Alliance. And I'd love you to tell us what this alliance is and what LANA's mission is before the pandemic, now during, and hopefully after the pandemic.
Sure, happily. So the Los Angeles Nightlife Alliance, or LANA, is a community-based organization that advocates for and convenes Los Angeles independent nightlife community. I could trace back the origination of our group to late 2018, early 2019, where a number of individuals who were active and had various roles in LA's nightlife scene began convening, having taken inspiration from places like London, Amsterdam, Berlin, Paris, and even San Francisco, New York, places that had formed or were beginning to form either governmental or sort of quasi-private governmental organizations that would focus on and advocate for nightlife in a more formal capacity. So in a lot of places, these are referred to night mayors or night czars. In New York, you have the Office of Nightlife that's under the economic development wing of the mayor's office. And as we were looking around Los Angeles, we were realizing that nothing like we didn't really see that anything like that existed. So we kind of started where we could by convening and organizing our community, independent nightlife community. A lot of us came from, I would say, the techno and house music scenes, but our ranks have grown and diversified as well. The mission of the organization is to sort of community organize amongst ourselves. We do a lot of events, whether those are special trainings or panel discussions, sort of town hall type based events, to sort of organize and then advocate on behalf of the independent nightlife community to the city government and others in order to address issues that we see as basically those that create and participate in nightlife in Los Angeles.
Why was it necessary to create this group? You said at one moment that Los Angeles didn't have it. So you saw a necessity, and what is that necessity? And
Well, I think Los Angeles's nightlife is unique in some ways in that a lot of the sort of most vital and vibrant nightlife activity as far as we see it, takes place in basically unsanctioned type spaces. So I'm referring to warehouse parties, loft parties, and that's by necessity. There are rules and regulations in Los Angeles, that make it difficult to conduct what we would think are really sort of robust and vital and vibrant nightlife totally within the rules, I guess. We also kind of had a sense that there was sort of a lag or a delay in sort of the broader recognition of nightlife as something that could be considered vitally important culture to the city of LA. I mean, LA has a lot of culture-driven economy from, of course, the movies, fashion, music as well. But we felt that there wasn't a voice for sort of independent nightlife that we saw thriving across the Southland every weekend, but it didn't really seem to have any sort of unified voice or representation, particularly one that could influence how policies and regulations are sort of shaped and continue to evolve here in LA.
So that's where the mayors come in.
Right. And that's why we also wanted to sort of get organized as a group to identify what the priorities and the needs of Los Angeles independent nightlife were, so that we could sort of present and continue to present a unified voice and unified front to city government, to local city government is what our focus is.
What was your last night out before?
That's a good question. Yeah.
It's a question, that has come to that I've spoken about with a few guests, most notoriously with Linnell George, who so much remembers that last night out, partly because what she saw has been heightened in some way because it's the last time she could be with a group of people. Describe it to me. Bring me back.
Sure.
Tell me
Interesting.
Tell me the date, first of all. Do you remember it?
I actually have been asking this question to a lot of my friends. I think it kind of evokes some resonant and warm feelings, some warm nostalgic feelings, as well as some sadness in that we cannot participate in this joyful activity that many of us love so much. So my last night out was it must have been the first weekend in March. Some DJs, and they're called Chaos in the CBD, were playing a warehouse party on either a Friday or a Saturday night, and it was a cracking party. I would say maybe 300, 400 people in a warehouse space that's familiar to a lot of sort of regular nightlife goers, and it was a fun big party that went late into the night, and it was a pleasure to see folks who are my close friends DJing. And the crowd enjoying it. So it was definitely I would consider it an above average party and an above average night, even not knowing that it would be my last night.
You didn't suspect it would have been around the 7th or 8th of March or the 15th of March?
Yeah, it would have been probably the 7th or either the 20th. Yeah, I think it was actually February 29th, which was the last Saturday, February, leap year. So I think at that time, there was maybe some concern creeping around the edges of everyone's mind, but
But really only the edges at that point.
Yeah, I would say the picture became much more clear over the next couple of weeks, and then, as in the middle of March, the conditions changed drastically.
Nick, you were mentioning nostalgia, and I read a beautiful piece. I don't know if you happened upon it in the New York Times yesterday. By Megan Abbott, called "What is New York Without New York Bars?" Because I'm going to read a few lines from it.
Sure.
It begins with one sentence, which is one paragraph. And maybe you can comment on that one sentence. I miss bars. She goes on to say, I miss the noise, the jostling shoulders, the promise the night offers. I miss a long dark pour of Guinness and the gleaming liquor bottle standing sentry behind the bartender. I miss a crush for the ladies' room, graffiti decade thick. I miss the endless possibility in conversations overheard, lives intersecting. but what I miss most and almost lacerating intensity are the New York City bars. And then she goes on and she says, I miss drinking at the Ear in Soho. I miss the changing crowds of a Manhattan bar. I miss Milano on East Houston Street. I miss the bars with jukeboxes. I miss the bars that came into my life because of their proximity to my favorite city haunts. And then I'll read you another passage in a moment. Just react to that.
It makes my heart hurt. Both specifically for New York, which has obviously been hit very hard. For the fact that in New York, more so in LA, I think these bars serve a role as sort of your living room outside of your apartment. I spent a small part of my life living in New York, and it seemed like almost the goal or the modus operandi was to, not be home for as long as possible to get the most out of every day living in the city.
Yeah.
I feel a lot for friends and everyone in New York who where basically that opportunity is now completely evaporated. And my other strong reaction is, all of that resonates with me, and I miss all of those sensations, really electrifying and exciting sensations. But, what I would add and what I think is really at the core of my love of nightlife is sort of the communal and social enjoyment of music coming out of loudspeakers at high volume, right?
Right.
Sort of that shared ecstasy that you get by being in a crowd and locking into a groove. That takes place at bars as well, but, also in nightclubs and, warehouses and raves, right? So all of that really resonates with me strongly. And my first reaction is also adding the element of the communal enjoyment of music and the sort of joy and ecstasy that can bring.
That's very beautiful. We'll come back to that essay, and you'll read it tonight. We'll come back. We'll come back to it in a moment. I know that nightlife. I mean, you're talking not just about bars, but you're talking about nightlife in general. What kind of jobs does that encompass?
It's an ecosystem, right? So, just sort of riffing off the top of my head, of course, you have the DJ and the performers who are, the center of the musical attention for the night. Beyond that, you have bar staff that serve the drinks. You have security staff that either is working at the outside of the venue or within the venue. You have the people that are providing the sound system and that are doing the acoustic and the audio engineering that make it possible to have a loud night of music. Beyond that, if you extend out, you have to get to and from the venue, so we have Uber drivers and Lyft drivers serving the nightlife population and the nightlife community.
So many people are impacted. I mean, that's what is tremendous about this pandemic. So many people are impacted, and I suspect your group is trying to figure out what comes after this subsides. And I know that you conducted a survey for the nightlife workers, freelancers, business and patrons impacted by COVID-19. What were the results of this survey, and did some of those results actually, Nick, surprise you?
Unfortunately, the results were unsurprising, and okay. I say that in that basically what we were reporting is that what we were seeing in the results of our survey is that essentially the bottom has fallen out, from many people active in this world. I mean, there are just opportunities to socialize and really make the most of nightlife have essentially been eliminated by the need to socially distance. Nightlife is really has a lot of ingenuity and adaptability and nimbleness, and I think we've seen a lot of beautiful efforts to regain some of those feelings of community and ecstasy, making the most of telecommunication and wireless technologies. But the fact of the matter is that the real energy and the real sort of beauty of what I sort of cherish and hold dear and work on and think about, and my colleagues in Lana and many, many more other people, is that feeling of being together and sort of chasing that communal communal joy based around sort of music and culture and being together and being a little bit wild and but mostly being together in what and sometimes is a really sort of could be seen as crazy environment, high temperatures, a lot of bodies packed together, as that passage you quoted from alluded to, loud sounds. I mean, those are sort of some of the ingredients that are, in my mind, essential.
Nick, don't you think that people will, after this moment of seclusion, precisely want to come back together for a loud night together, close to others? Couldn't that be one of the ways in which one could imagine the future in one's
absolutely,
in one's more optimistic moments, rather than the dire forecast which you seem to paint, which I'm sure is based on the results which you wish were different?
Absolutely, I think there will be a tremendous amount of pent up energy and really strong desires to be in these situations again. And, I'm confident that eventually, in some shape or form, they will return. Where I'm a little bit more cynical and pessimistic is how quickly that will happen,
right? And
how much of sort of the existing nightlife infrastructure will
survive.
How much will survive when it's all said and done, and again, who and how will emerge on the other side of it with an ability to
who knows? And you were mentioning that Lana has connections now with other cities. You went as far as Berlin and elsewhere, London. Have you discussed best practices for reopening? What have you learned from other cities? I know that, for instance, South Korea is a real cautionary tale.
Yeah, so there is sort of a budding network and cottage industry of folks like myself and the nightmare of Amsterdam and the Club Commission in Berlin, the Office of Nightlife in New York City, and that I'm part of a free-flowing WhatsApp conversation with a lot of people where there are constant updates on how all these various places across the world are dealing with opening back up. So yeah, there's it's very much a global network of folks thinking and caring about this stuff and keeping each other updated on how the world of nightlife and nighttime culture specifically is beginning to sort of reopen, what the nascent challenges are and what sort of little glimmers of hope and optimism can be gained in sort of sharing that information. So yeah, you cited Seoul, and I think this story is maybe not more than 2 or 3 weeks old, where they reopened up a number of nightclubs because their metrics were going down in a positive direction, and the authorities felt that it was possible to reopen some clubs. From what I've read, it had to do with one infected individual who made a visit to 3 to 5 nightclubs over the course of one night, and it resulted in a mini outbreak. And the authorities in Seoul moved quickly to shut it down. I also recently read that in a response to that mini outbreak, South Korea conducted 46,000 tests of individuals.
Wow.
Just related to that one. And so that, I think that is the closest, at least what I'm aware of a reopening of nightclubs of sorts. I think what's happening in other cities in terms of sort of regulatory relief and changes is that they are opening up places like bars and restaurants, and particularly those that can take advantage of adjacent outdoor space to sort of take up more space and do more social distancing, while also allowing people to be able to congregate once again.
I mean, the notion of social distancing and parties really just doesn't go together, does it, at all?
No, and that's not lost on many of us.
I'm sure not. I'm sure for you it must be. I mean, even the notion of social distancing and loud music and parties. I mean, it's so impossible to comprehend what will happen after this passes, and also with the bottom falling out, as you said, what will come in its place? And I imagine that you must be worried about those places that used to be bars that might become something else, and might, the progress of gentrification, as it were, is worrisome in this context.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it kind of goes both ways, right? Once you give someone a permit or permission to start doing something in a space, I mean, that's what I do as a planner, is get permissions to conduct certain activities in certain spaces. It's hard to take away, but I think also, the other way that it goes is that in a world of highly financialized real estate that is worth more and more in dense urban centers like Los Angeles.
Right.
At least it used to be worth more and more, prior to the pandemic. I think that's another sort of broader topic, how our cities will resume, or how our cities will go back to functioning as cities. Once you take that away, once you take that permission away, or once it goes away because it can no longer survive, it's a lot harder to put it back in place. So, in real estate, in urban development, as it relates to nightlife, there's what's called the agent of change principle, and it's codified and institutionalized in both London and in Berlin, where if there is a development that will change something to do with a property that's adjacent to an existing nightclub, for the purpose of this conversation, it is the responsibility of the developer to mitigate the impact of those nightclubs. The biggest impact is the noise, of course, from the new residents, because I think there were just too many stories of apartment buildings opening near nightclubs, and sort of a slow death by 1,000 cuts for these nightclubs, as they had to contend with noise complaints and coexisting with residential uses. I mean, I think a lot of nightclubs are purposely located in places away from residences, whether that be, formerly vibrant downtown core areas, warehouse, loft type districts, right? I mean, a lot of these places are located away from residences because they do have externalities and impact. That's a concept that is recognized.
This article, which I just can't wait for you to read, by Megan Abbott, what is New York without New York bars? There's one paragraph which really spoke to me, where she writes the following: "In this precarious moment, the bars I find myself missing most are those that transport me to the past, to New York City of 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago or more. Bars that endured 3 or 4 wars, Prohibition and the Great Depression, and fought to city drop dead. Bars that endured the Spanish flu, and thus seemed to whisper a promise to me that they'll endure this pandemic."
My first reaction to that is that Los Angeles is just such a younger city than
Right.
New York.
Right.
And New York obviously changes at the blink of an eye, but so does Los Angeles. So, I'm not sure that I feel the same nostalgia for the past in Los Angeles. I mean, I understand that passage to mean that she is sort of pulling inner strength and optimism from sort of thinking about the resiliency of these bars that have made it through so much and will hopefully make it through this as well. For me, Los Angeles has always been such a sort of future-facing city. I think in a lot of instances, things happen here first. Cultural movements, cultural activities, they happen here first, and then they kind of promulgate and get broadcast and transmitted to other places in the world. Obviously, I miss a lot of the things that we lost.
She says, Nick. She says a little later in the essay. She says, "What these bars, without these bars, I feel unmoored, lost. I miss my city. That brings me to the last thing I miss: the bars we've already lost, to gentrification, to escalating rents, and sometimes just to time itself."
Mm-hmm.
And that's a feeling I think that we can imagine, the nostalgia for something one didn't even really know.
Yeah, that's a powerful feeling.
So
I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I know. I love the silences because it causes us to pause in this moment where we have to pause. Give me, in the last few minutes we have, give me the best case scenario.
Because of sort of the dual nature of my life, I think about rules and regulations all the time, how to interpret codes, how to find opportunities within the rules, and then, how to also simply abandon and disregard the rules that don't serve us well. Right.
And one can only really break rules if one knows them.
Right. And, I'll just be, I don't know, I'll just make it as directly as possible. I mean, Los Angeles nightlife as it existed, as I know it, and as I love it, simply would not exist if it operated within the parameters of what the rules currently allow. You have thousands of party goers every weekend going out to warehouse spaces that probably have more people in them than would be permitted otherwise, go later and make more noise than would be permitted otherwise, and effectively have to exist outside of, what is permitted by the rules and regulations that apply. I think that, more than ever, as we are looking at all these rules and thinking about how the coronavirus has made them essentially pointless, I think what I take the most hope in and what I'm the most excited about is looking to how we can sort of cast those rules, processes, agencies, bodies that don't really serve us well, how we can sort of leave those in the past and create a new framework, new regulatory framework and new parameters that allow us to come back and allow, the incredible communal, creative, cultural energy that exists and that is constantly sort of churning and fermenting in a place like LA to come back, right? And so this is already starting to happen. I mean, the California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control, which regulates the sales of alcohol, is now allowing restaurants and bars to do cocktails to go, right? Which wasn't possible before. I realize it's a pretty small thing, right? It's not going to change the world. But I don't think that prohibition needs to be put back in place once the world starts to operate and behave in a way that's a little bit closer to how it used to be before. Similarly, right now, the same agency and Department of City Planning is trying to make it easier to use outdoor space for outdoor dining and outdoor seating. I think this is happening in a lot of places. It's sort of the low-hanging fruit as cities and cultural hubs and centers look to reopen. Make it easier to put seating on the sidewalk as long as it allows people to continue to pass through. Make use of parking lots or other outdoor spaces. Make it easier for people to enjoy those spaces because we are not going to be able to go back to, sitting shoulder to shoulder in a loud, busy restaurant, which obviously is a wonderful and enjoyable vibe. We're not going to be back to that soon. So let's think about how we can use our space differently. Similar with, closing streets, streets to car traffic to create more space. I mean, LA is notoriously park poor, right? So use the public space a little bit better.
Well, let's hope that the pandemic is in a way an invitation for us to think differently, and perhaps a portal to a new kind of way of congregating in a city like Los Angeles. Nick, it's been a pleasure to speak to you, and I hope someday to party with you in a very loud space, something I've done very little in my life, but maybe now is the time. And I feel like with you, I might have the best guide.
Time to think about things differently, Paul.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to have a good guide in the city to party is something I relish. Thank you so much.
It would be my absolute pleasure, Paul, and this conversation was too.
Thank you very, very much. Take good care of yourself.
You as well, Paul. Enjoy your night. Bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.